Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second of 8 shifter sessions in which we will be delving into different perspectives on the concept of waiting. My name is Amara Antilla, and I'm the Senior Curator at the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati. On behalf of the CAC and our co-hosts, the MIT List, I'm very happy to welcome Rit Premnath and Abby Alpert, co-editors of Shifter and the conveners of this program series. I also want to make a few quick notes that following the presentation, we will be opening things up for a Q&A using the chat function in Zoom. And also to remind everyone that we are recording these sessions and you can view the last event on the CAC's and the List's YouTube channels. I also want to acknowledge and welcome any of you that may be new to the CAC or the List and encourage you to check out our websites and follow us on social media. I also hope that you'll join us for our next session, which is on October 22nd. So thank you, and now I'll turn things over to Rick.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second in the series of Shifter sessions. Thank you all for attending. I want to start by thanking Natalie Bell and Amara Antilla, the curators at MIT List and the Center for Contemporary Art in Cincinnati, for inviting us to do this series. I also want to thank Emily Garner from the MIT List, who has been an incredible support in getting all of this up and running. And Nick Cordone, who's our IT person today, and helping us run this Zoom session, the world that we live in now. And all of the people really at MIT and CAC who've made this happen. My name is Rit Premnath, and along with Abby Alpert, I co-edit Shifter. Shifter is a discursive platform. We organize discussions like these that are thematic and topical. And we produce publications. And so this series of events will unfold into a publication that comes out in fall of 2021 and will be launched at MIT, CAC, and other places. We're so thrilled to have Nicole Fleetwood and Jerome Everson today with us, and Abby Alpert will introduce them. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, everyone, for being here. Yeah, so I'm Avi Alpert with Rit. I co-edit Shifter. Just a quick word on the series. We've been doing these public conversations for about 5-6 years now. We are always looking at topics that are fundamental to our lives, but don't always capture our full attention, or somewhat infrastructural, lay the groundwork for the other things we do. So we did a session on language with the Dictionary of the Possible. We did a session on the process of learning, not just the content of what we learn, that we called learning and unlearning. And then Rit's been thinking for a long time about waiting, sort of waiting for us to do a session on waiting. And this really seemed like the opportune moment for all the complex reasons that we're living through. And we wanted to explore these different aspects of waiting, its cruelty, but also its potential for hope, and the way that it's differentially distributed and experienced depending on politics, identity, worldview. And so we invited both an open call and some targeted speakers to come and share their thoughts on this. And so each of them will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. There'll be some time for them to respond to each other. And then Rit and I will respond or moderate a Q&A. And please really feel entitled and welcome to put questions into the chat, and we will try to pass them along. So I'll introduce Nicole Fleetwood first. She'll be our second speaker, and then Jerome Everson. So Nicole Fleetwood is a writer, curator, and professor of American Studies and Art History at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Professor Fleetwood's books are Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration with Harvard Press 2020, On Racial Icons, Blackness and the Public Imagination with Rutgers University Press 2015, and Troubling Vision, Performance, Visuality, and Blackness, University of Chicago Press 2011. And the Marking Time, which I think she'll say more about, is also, of course, an exhibition now at PS1. or related, she can say more, sorry. She is co-editor of Aperture Magazine's Prison Nation and has co-curated exhibitions and programs on art and mass incarceration at the Andrew Friedman Home, Aperture Foundation, Cleveland Public Library, Mural Arts Philadelphia, and the Zimmerli Art Museum. Her work has been supported by the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, New York Public Library's Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers, ACLS, the Whiting Foundation, Denniston Hill Residency, Schaumburg Center for Scholars and Residents, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And now Kevin Jerome Everson, who will be our first speaker. Kevin Jerome Everson lives and works in Charlottesville, Virginia. He holds an MFA from Ohio University and a BFA from the University of Akron, and is professor of art at the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. Everson was awarded the 2012 Alpert Award for Film Video, no relation. His films have been the subject of mid-career retrospectives at the Tate Modern in fall 2017, Modern and Contemporary Art Museum of Seoul, Korea, February 2017, the Biennale 2014, Vision du Réel, Nyon, Switzerland 2012, the Whitney Museum of American Art in 2011, and the Centre Pompidou in 2009. His work has been featured at the 2008, 2012, and 2017 Whitney Biennials and the 2013 Sharjah Biennial. So thanks to both of them for taking the time to be with us tonight, and I will pass it over to Kevin.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, this is exciting being on here with Nicole. Yeah, so yeah, so I guess I'll start off. I'm gonna show a film that's called IFO, Identified Flying Objects, and the film is about basically the Black oral tradition in a weird way, and maybe about Afrofuturism, I think, too, as well, but mostly about Afro past, I guess, so to speak. So it's basically three eyewitnesses of I guess flying saucers from African American perspective. So I guess you can play that. Yeah, right on.
My name's Albert Thomas from Mansfield, Ohio. Born June 16, 1958, and drove a cab for like 7 years. And one night I pick up a customer, and we're riding around 10 o'clock at night. I'm taking her to work, and we see these two lights in the sky, and they're like side by side, and we just sat there and looked at them, and all of a sudden it just went straight up into the sky and disappeared. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Did you see that?" And she's like, "Yeah." And we're amazed. First time ever.
On October 18, 1973, at approximately 10:30 p.m., a UH-1H helicopter of the United States Army Reserve left Port Columbus, Ohio, for its home base of Cleveland Hopkins Airport. In command was Captain Lawrence J. Coyne, 36. At the controls, Lieutenant Orijo Jesse, 26. Behind Jesse sat Sergeant John Healy, 35, a Cleveland policeman who was the flight medic. Sergeant Robert Yancek, 23, a computer technician. The helicopter was cruising at 2,500 feet above sea level at an indicated airspeed of 90 knots, averaging 1,200 elevation. The night was totally clear, calm, and starry. About 10 miles south of Mansfield, Healy noticed a single red light west flying south. It seemed brighter than a standard aircraft port wing light, but it was not considered relevant traffic, and he did not recall mentioning it. An estimated 2 minutes later, at approximately 11:02 p.m., Yanisek noted a single red light on the southeast horizon. He assumed it was either a radio tower beacon or an aircraft port wing light, most likely an aircraft, since it was not flashing, and he watched it, quote, for a long time, a minute to nearly 90 seconds, end quote, before calling it to Coyne's attention. Coyne, smoking, relaxing, glanced over, noted the light, assumed it was distant traffic, and told Yanisek casually to, quote, keep an eye on it, end quote. After an estimated additional 30 seconds, Yanisek announced that the light had turned toward the helicopter and appeared to be on a converging flight path. Coyne verified Janicek's assessment, grabbed the controls from Jesse, and put the UH-1H into a powered descent of approximately 50 feet per minute. Almost simultaneously, Coyne established radio contact with Mansfield Control Tower, 10 miles to the northeast. Coyne thought the flight was an Air National Guard F-100 from Mansfield. After an initial acknowledgement, "This is Mansfield Tower, go ahead, Army 15444," radio contact failed. Jesse then attempted transmission on both UHF and VHF frequencies without success. Although the channel and keying tones were both heard, there was no response from Mansfield, and a subsequent check by Coyne revealed that Mansfield had no tape of even the initial transmission. The last F-100 had landed at 10:47 p.m. The red light continued its radial bearing and increased greatly in intensity. The last altitude he noted was 1,700 feet. Just as a collision appeared imminent, the unknown light halted in its westward course and assumed a hovering relationship above and in front of the helicopter. Quote, "It wasn't cruising, it was stopped. For maybe 10 to 12 seconds, just stopped," end quote, Janicek reported. Coyne, Healy, and Janicek agree that a cigar-shaped, slightly domed object subtended an angle of nearly the width of the front windshield. A featureless, gray, metallic-looking structure was precisely delineated against the background stars. The red light animated from the bow, a white light became visible at a slightly indented stern, and then a green pyramid-shaped beam became visible. The green beam passed upward over the helicopter nose, swung up through the windshield, continued upward, and entered the tinted upper window panels. At that point, and not before, the cockpit was enveloped in green light. The object began to accelerate off to the west, now with only the white tail light visible. The white light maintained its intensity even at its distance, and finally, according to Coyne and Healy, it appeared to execute a decisive 45-degree turn to the right. Healy reported that he watched the object moving westward for a couple of minutes. After the object had broken off its hovering relationship, Jesse and Coyne noted that the magnetic compass disc was rotating approximately 4 times per minute, and that the altimeter read approximately 3,500 feet, a 1,000 foot per minute climb was in progress. Coyne insists that the collective was still bottomed from his evasive descent. Since the collective could not be lowered further, he had no alternative but to lift it, whatever the results, and after a few seconds of gingerly maneuvering controls, during which the helicopter reached nearly 3,800 feet, positive control was achieved. By that time, the white light had already moved into the Mansfield area.
My name's Albert Thomas from Mansfield, Ohio. Born June 16th, 1958. And drove a cab for like 7 years. And one night I pick up a customer and we're riding around 10 o'clock at night. I'm taking her to work and we see these two lights in the sky and they're like side by side, and we just sat there and looked at them, and all of a sudden it just went straight up into the sky and disappeared. And she looked at me and I looked at her and she said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Did you see that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And they were like this, and then they went straight up. I mean, I ain't never seen nothing like that in my life.
Fuck. Oh, no. Did I lose? Oh no. Oh, there. Oh, I'm here. Oh, I'm like panicking. Yeah. Yeah, I should have gave more of a kind of a little bit more introduction to that film. Yeah. Yeah, I'm from Mansfield, Ohio, which is like, if anybody knows Ohio, it's like halfway between Cleveland and Columbus, Ohio, and Northeast Ohio. And the coin incident, which was described by Carmen Hitterbot, a colleague now. Now she's the dean of the art school at VCU in Richmond. That was supposed to be the most creditable UFO sighting in history of the United States, and just happened to be over my hometown. And the only reason I think it's credible because they lost a lot of fuel as they were ascending, chasing this cigar-shaped object. But you know, my uncles and them, they're all like skeptical and stuff, so they just assume that maybe those guys flew to Indianapolis to pick up hookers or something like that. But they will believe like the official record. But there's a lot of African Americans and stuff who've seen UFOs and stuff, and then the whole idea of oral tradition, like the ruling class just doesn't believe what they say. And then I said there's 3 UFO sightings in that one. There was the one by Albert Thomas, the cab driver, the coining events, and you see the repetition of these three objects in the sky. I mean, my dad saw that in the 70s. So those are the kind of 3 UFO sightings. And so I mean, I basically just there's a woman named Shadina Brooks who was in another film of mine. And she said her stepdad had saw UFOs. I went to ask him about it, which was Albert Thomas. And so he did those gestures, and I just had those kids, Elijah and Sevion, and my grandson Trajan and my daughter, Matilda, do those gestures. And for me, it's kind of waiting, kind of, you know, like just kind of staring up, because I make a lot of films about the moon, about eclipses and stuff like that. And then so the whole idea, I like George Clinton, prominent Funkadelic. He has this great line about the moon, and he says, "We were already up there. We were just waiting on y'all." So basically, the whole idea of forward thinking of African American culture has always been kind of science fiction and stuff, and also science reality, the moon and stuff. Yeah, yeah. Is anybody else on there? Or just me talking? Right on. I can get down with that. Just kind of chatting. Just chatting. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. I think that's, yeah. Yeah. So the whole idea of just kind of waiting for, and then for me, again, George Clinton is one of my favorite artists. And I remember there's a song about the mothership and just waiting for the mothership to arrive and stuff like that. So I was thinking about having these, like, you know, the repetition of that gesture and having those kids do that and just kind of staring up, and something that we don't do a lot is look up. So yeah, right on.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Yeah, right
on. And now we'll have our presentation from Nicole Fleetwood. Thank you, Kevin. We'll have time to unpack this after Nicole's presentation. There's a lot to talk about. And,
Yeah, right on.
That was awesome, Kevin. Can everybody hear me?
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, right on.
Thank you all so much, Avi, Rit, Emily, Amara, everybody involved in making this happen. It is absolutely a joy to be in conversation with my friend Kevin. We've been friends for about 10 years, and we're both from Ohio. And we both like slow time. And I'm just going to talk to you about my book and exhibition. It's not a formal presentation. It's just, I like to talk around images. And I really love this theme, waiting. It's actually something that I spend a lot of time doing and thinking about. And the project actually started for me around trying to figure out a relationship between what felt like a real pain and loss in my family over the incarceration, long-term incarceration of some of my cousins, like my cousin Alan, who was sentenced to life when he was 18, a few weeks after I graduated from college, and how interminable that is. And, you know, and I had these images of us visiting him in the visiting room of prisons. And I just started to write about these images maybe 9 or 10 years ago. And from that, the project grew to me being in more and more conversation with other currently and formerly incarcerated people, and then focusing more the project around the visual culture of mass incarceration. And, you know, and I came up with, partly through like interviews with people in prison or people who've been in prison, I started to just really think about the conditions of making art and producing culture and signifying within carceral facilities. So the categories that I came up with are like penal space, which is like the built environment of prison. It is the prison cell, but it's also the social relations that are structured through carcerality. And it's also about a psychic space. And so one of the examples for me of like penal spaces, this is one of my favorite works by Ronnie Goodman. And it's the art workshop space in San Quentin, where he was in prison for many years and became an accomplished portrait artist. And here he's looking at one of his lithographs. And when I talk to him, he's also talking about the kind of curatorial work that's going into this, like how he was actually kind of he's painting multiple works of art, but he's also bringing works close to him that works close to his body and in proximity that really were meaningful to him, people he had relationships with and the like. And here's another example of what I talk about penal space. And I'm saying this because the whole project is about me, about like thinking about the relationship between space, time, and matter in prison. And Tamika Cole made this graphite collage when she was in a work release program in Alabama and was experiencing some abuses by prison guards. And so she said it was actually in the making of this work that she was able to create her own psychic space for survival. And these works, the works that I've just shown you so far, are on display. My book came out in April, and then September 17th, an exhibition that I curated based on the book opened at MoMA PS1, and it's going to be up until April 4th. Another example of penal matter is this work by Kenneth Reams, who's currently in prison in Arkansas, and he's on death row. And these are like food wrappers from vending machines and all kinds of profiteers from punishment systems selling basically trash to imprisoned people at just exploitive rates. And so he's commenting on that with this collage here, capitalization. I'm going to come back to this. This is, you'll see this in the exhibition too, but I wanted to get to like penal time because this theme is waiting. And I just spent a lot of time talking to people who have been in prison and who are in prison about how do you manage time when you have no control over your time? When a 1-year sentence could turn into a 5-year sentence or could turn into a life sentence. When you're dealing with issues of immobility, overcrowding of cells, but also like the isolation of being so far away from everyone and everything you love. And, you know, and part of it is just like really, it's embodied, like our experience of time is so embodied, but it's also like this existential thing, especially if you're in prison and you're given a life sentence, and it's like, what does it mean to spend your life in a 6-foot by 9-foot cell? And a lot of the artists were like exploring the idea of penal times in their art and connecting it to like longer histories of Black subjugation. So Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter, and Kevin, you should watch this video. I'm going to send you a link to it. Is an incredible 15-minute sonic video that she created about this long duration of Black suffering. And she restages and raps about her experience of, talk about waiting, of being in labor. She was pregnant in prison and being shackled to a gurney for 43 hours. And then eventually having to do an emergency C-section. And she connects it to, you know, the title of it is Ain't I a Woman? So she's connecting it to the 19th century abolitionist Sojourner Truth and like this long history of state control over Black women's reproduction and bodies. And another example of like just how artists are really meditating on time and duration and Black captivity is this work by Jared Owens called Elapsium, Master and Helm. And here he's taken a really iconic image of abolition, and it's the Brooks slave ship from 1788. The art historian Cheryl Finley has written a lot about this in her book Committed to Memory, about the circulation of this iconic image. And over the slave icon, he has overlaid Ferreton blueprint, and Ferreton is a prison where he was incarcerated for over a decade. And so he's lined up the holding cells of the prison and the slave ship in this work called Elapsium. I'll show a couple more. I don't want to take up too much time. And I'm skipping ahead of some things because I want to make sure that I'm pointing out words that really are about the theme of the show. A lot of artists in prison do portrait work. And portrait work in prison like serves so many functions. One is it's a type of currency. A lot of people barter and trade for like a really good commissioned portrait. It's also like an important way of self-representing, self-representing in a way that challenges like prison indexes like mugshots and prison ID photos. And sometimes it's the only figurative or representational form that imprisoned people have control over. But it's also often for imprisoned people a way of literally managing time, managing their sentence, and also marking time, as the title of my book is Marking Time. And so Jesse Crimes is one of the artists in my exhibition, did this portrait series on prison soaps during his first year in prison when he was in solitary confinement and he didn't have art supplies. And so what he did was take ready-made images from magazines or from legal papers and would transfer mugshots and then later on celebrity headshots onto these prison bars of soap. And the cover of my book, I'm gonna see if I can, which I showed you when I first, my first screen, I don't know if you can see this because of my like weird backdrop, but I'll go back to it in a sec. It's so weird how this happens. Anyways, the cover of my book is a series by Mark Lafney called Pyrrhic Defeat, a visual study of mass incarceration. And so far it's close to 700 portraits of people he's in prison with. And you know, it's in terms of like a meditation on waiting. So each of these portraits take about 20 minutes. He asks imprisoned people to sit for him for 20 minutes while he does these like remarkable sketches. And he started it in 2014. And he describes this work as really trying to account for the toll of mass incarceration from the site of captivity. And with the time I have remaining, I'm gonna skip ahead to because I want to make sure I get to show you some things that, wait a minute, I just lost an image. I'm gonna, I'll pull up a couple of images from the show, but Abby, I don't want to waste time doing that. So I wanted to make sure, I want to turn it over to you and Rhett, and then I'm just going to pull up like 3 more images from the exhibition that I wanted to show people, if that's okay.
Yeah, and you can take your time, Nicole. Don't feel
okay.
rushed.
Okay, yeah. I wanted to honor the amount of time that you were talking about, but there are a couple of images from the exhibition. They're like recent images that I didn't have time to put in a slide, that the slide presentation, if you don't mind me just grabbing them real quick, okay?
You will
Yeah,
wait.
yeah, take your time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen while we do that.
I'll just say while Nicole's doing that, her background is an image of the show, if I'm correct, at MoMA PS1. So you can also see that while we wait.
It is. So, let's see. Okay, I have it. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so I wanted to show you, can you all see that? This is an image from the installation shot from PS1, where you see the works installed, and I think the cover of the book doesn't really give it do justice. So they're all about, they're each 12 by 9s, and in the far wall, you'll see Mark Lofney's most recent additions to the series, and these are a group of images or portraits of imprisonment in masks. They're on, right now they're on lockdown. That's like the attempt that, that's the effort that a lot of prisons are, that's their policy around curtailing the spread of COVID inside prisons, is to lock people in solitary confinement. So since March, Mark and all the other people he's in prison with, they've been basically in their cells for 23 hours a day. And so they're waiting, but they're not sure what they're waiting for. And then I'm going to show you a few other images from the installation. This is a couple of works by Gilberto Rivera, who was in prison for about 18 years, and he's from Puerto Rico, grew up in Brooklyn, and was a graffiti artist, and did this triptych over the summer, really reflecting on like first line and essential workers and the impact of COVID on the neighborhood where he lives in, and where he grew up in Brooklyn and where he lives in the Bronx. And this is part of my backdrop, which is Apocalyptine 16389-067 by Jesse Crimes. And it consists of 39 prison bed sheets that he worked on for a 3-year period when he was in federal prison. And each bed sheet is a compilation of images that he transferred from the New York Times. These are images that he transferred with like hair gel and toothpaste, whatever he could use as a transfer medium. And then he draw and etched on top of them. And each time he finished the panel, he would send it out of prison and kind of hold on to that image as he worked on another panel. And he wasn't able to see the work in its entirety until he was released from prison like 3.5 years later. Let's see what else I have. I'm trying to look at, and so I'll end with this image in terms of thinking about waiting and time. So this is in the prison, I mean, this is in the yard of PS1 that we say look like a prison yard. And most of the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated artists in the show said that that space looked very familiar to them. And, you know, PS1 is a former school building, and its architecture is very much in conversation with the architecture of prisons and hospitals and other public facilities and kind of disciplinary spaces. On the outside of one of the walls, we did a series of collages by Ojuri Lutalo, who is a Black Liberation Army member and was in solitary confinement for 22 years in the state of New Jersey because of his political beliefs. And during that time, he made like hundreds and hundreds of collages documenting his experience, and really as a way of maintaining a relationship to himself. So when he was placed in solitary confinement, it was in 1986, and he wrote a letter to the American Friends Service Committee asking why he had been moved into administrative segregation, which is just a fancy name for the whole or solitary confinement. And he asked how long he would be in there. So that was the letter he wrote in 86. And he was released in 2009. And during that time of like waiting and trying to appeal, he just made hundreds and hundreds of collages. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you so much, Kevin, for your presentations. I just want to invite the audience, the people who are attending. We're sorry we can't see you, but please chat in any thoughts or questions, and Avi and I will read them out to Nicole and Kevin. As I was listening to both of you, I was sort of thinking about both the fact that waiting is always a kind of shared activity, that people are waiting together, and this form of portraiture or marking time is also a way of recognizing each other's being together in the situation. I was thinking also of the title of Kevin's video, Identified Flying Object, and the way in which identification functions within that title, the shared oral tradition, a form of shared understanding and belief that operates in some ways outside of the kind of legislative identification of people. And so there were these things that felt very interesting to me, but I wanted to maybe start by inviting Kevin, if you want to, if you had any responses to Nicole, and vice versa, as a way of starting this conversation.
Yeah, because I know you've been working on this project for about 10 years now. You've been working on this, and then because you had your cousins or something locked up, and Alan, I think, right? His name? Yeah, and so the whole idea of people making art in there and stuff, and I was really moved that you picked my experience as prison is not as prisoner or anything like that, but as labor, because in my hometown of Mansfield, Ohio, the main industry, or where my kinfolks and friends have made their living or a career as prison guards. And so it's kind of a catch-22, like the more crime in Cleveland, Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Canton and Akron, the more money that comes to my community. So you see that, so to speak. And my son's mom's a prison guard, and my uncle retired as a captain in the prison and stuff like that. So I see it. So I see prison from that particular standpoint. And then the whole idea for me, time is, for them, it's more about retirement. You know, when they get out of the system, so to speak, to retire, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. And there's a legal theorist whose name is going to slip my mind right now. He was at Columbia, and but he writes about like sentencing and like the people who give someone a legal sentence, a prison sentence, like the policymakers, the prosecutors, the judges. They've never done prison time.
No, of course.
So they have no idea. Like, so it's just such a absolute disconnect between the way people get sentenced and an understanding of what that sentence means by the people who are adjudicating that sentence. Because 5 years in a prison cell is not like 5 years for me living here in Harlem. It's absolutely not the same thing. And so I was trying to get at some of that, like that disconnect between the experience of temporalities, like inside prison, and then like in these other in these other arenas of life, even when we might have proximity to prison. So like my waiting for my cousin to be released, Alan was released after 21 years.
Oh, he was? Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was released. My waiting for Alan to be released is very different than Alan's experience of being in prison and hoping in prison that he is released, right? So that we're operating in very different temporalities. And when Alan was released from prison, he was also released with like just hundreds, probably thousands of photographs that have been sent to him from family over those 2 decades. So he also had this crazy archive, and he had all these like images of that kind of just like showed it like our aging over like these 2 decades, right? Like he was and I write about like he became in some ways our family archivist because he had more images of our family than anybody else. Yeah. And those images to me have they're attached to the waiting, the kind of a longing and a way of trying to stay connected. But Rich, something you said really struck me, and it was that, like you said, waiting as being, I don't know if you almost described it as something as having a relationality, and I'm just kind of sitting and thinking on that. But I'm a huge fan of. I've seen a lot of Kevin's work, and part of why I love Kevin's work, I love it for many reasons. One, his films are just incredibly beautiful, and often there's a kind of relaxed doing nothing, or there's a very,
I like a lot of nothing. I like a lot of nothing.
But then there's a lot of also kind of slow time around work and labor in the body.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking constantly about time.
Yeah.
And I feel like that time is also like there's a relationship for that to that time, and like I don't know, there's something anticipatory, I think, in your practice, but your films never feel anxious. Yeah. There's no anxiousness in your film, but there's something anticipatory for me. And because I just seen you over the course of knowing you make like hundreds and hundreds of work. And I'm wondering and so what's being exhausted there?
Yeah, me, but I think Rick saw some of these earlier films that I made that were prison guards.
I know those films.
The first 2, yeah, and I don't even know where they are.
You also have photographs of prison guards. You had a couple of
that was one of some of the artwork I made was basically these end tables that had all these prison guards. Yeah, because I was at the Black Male Show, that kind of thing. Because I always thought that, because it's funny, because like because we had I have a different relationship time, which is through work. I only had a few kin folks that have been locked up for a little bit of time, but we're always, I had cousins who were like 26, like saying, Lord, I can't wait till I retire. I can't wait till I'm 65. I was like, damn, you ain't even 30 yet, there's something about just getting it done, getting it through, so to speak, because you said your cousin, Alan's been 21 years. My son's mom, I think she just finished her 21st year of prison guard. So, so he was basically in the, so that for us, that went by quick, but for him, it went by slow, so to speak. So that whole idea, because I think, like Beta started in 99, started working in the penal institution then. So it's a whole different set of, gestures and like rhythms and stuff like that. Yeah.
I was curious, Rick, you mentioned this kind of waiting with, and Nicole, you made this remark in your presentation that these people were waiting, but it wasn't clear what they were waiting for. And there's something really interesting in these prepositions, right? It's kind of, are we waiting with?
Right.
Or are we just waiting as such, and who's experiencing that? And as you were talking about sentencing, I thought a little bit of, the fact that people don't wait with each other, and this, that there's this real separation in the kinds of ways in which people experience waiting. And also had me think, Kevin, that film is haunting in a way, and beautiful and elegant, but the ritual aspects that really kind of come out with the hand motion, I was thinking also when Nicole, you mentioned someone who brings the works close to them, kind of brings the works close to their body. And I know you were talking about meditation when we were sort of hanging out in the Zoom room earlier. I'm just curious if either of you have more thoughts on, kind of how ritual factors in these kind of different modes of waiting. This kind of, is there a way that ritual can kind of help us to wait with each other? Is it part of this waiting for process, or is it just mark the fact? I mean, in that kind of existential gloss, is it because we are just sort of waiting to die, and we find ways to mark time, and we experience that also differently depending on the conditions. We also, sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so I don't know if you have an.
Yeah, and someone asked about one of the works that I'll just go back to really quickly. I didn't want to like take up too much time showing images, but I can definitely go back to works. But what's interesting is like you all brought up in like your kind of description of like the kind of prompt around it, this idea of is there a kind of hope that's attached to waiting? And it might, as odd as it might sound, often imprisoned people are some of the most hopeful people because people are constantly hoping that their sentence will be reviewed, that something will get overturned. And that is like, for many people, it's the thing that keeps them going. It's the thing that stops them from falling into utter despair. Somebody in the audience asked about this work by Gil Battle. And Gil is a Filipino-American artist who's actually moved back to the Philippines after like 20 years in prison in California. And he also like, he talks about his story very differently than a lot of the other artists. So once he was released, he started doing these incredible, he was always an artist, and he was a tattoo artist in prison and just did a lot of works on paper. But once he moved to the Philippines, he started using dental tools to do these etchings on these engravings on ostrich egg shells. And they're like these tableaus from like experiences, or just like kind of just like a amalgamation of experiences and people in prison, not necessarily anyone specific. But he even said like this idea of, so sanctuary is attached to kind of a waiting, right? The idea of a sanctuary. And for him, it also was an odd thing because he had been struggling for like a couple of decades with like a really just debilitating addiction. And he was saying that like in some ways also like that being removed from that addiction, like he had gone to prison many times. And it was just this odd kind of experience, like not that he ever wanted to be imprisoned, but it was also like, trying to find this space and time away from like something that was just that had just like was ravaging him. And once he was, the last time he was released, that's when someone said, you should just go back to the Philippines. And that just kind of transformed everything to him and for him. And then like, it's been all about like, now him like reflecting on the memories of this, and his art is now about memory. His art is all about like and he's done like dozens of these eggs. He's also done these really exquisite prison playing cards where he's done these really detailed like characters who are like, it's very symbolic characters who are similar to like face cards. But the other thing about hopefulness is there's an artist in the show, this is his work, a watercolor he did, James Hoff, who was, when he was 17, he was sentenced to life without parole. And he kept telling people he was gonna get out. He spent 27 years in prison. He made incredible work. His work is getting a lot of attention from his work in the exhibition is getting a lot of attention. Much of it's never been seen before. But it was like this kind of hopefulness and not that like we need to like believe in miracles or not, but it was like this ruling to sentence a person under a certain age to life without parole is unconstitutional, and that's what led to his eventual release. He was released in August of last year. But he said when he came out, he was a little down, and he said, I met him like 2 months. I knew him. We were riding each other when he was in prison, but we met in person 2 months after his release, and he was very down and was transitioning. And he said, people are so nihilistic out here. He's like, people are so hopeless. And it was shocking to him that the level of just degradation and depravity, because he's like, in prison, you have to hold on to hope because there's nothing else to hold on to.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
And it's been a real adjustment for him in terms of just dealing with the level of just negative, just negativity, and just kind of hopelessness and like public life and public discourse alone,
That's really powerful. Thanks for that. I wanted to bring in a question in the chat. A couple have come in, if that's all right. So this is from David Cave writing, I guess for Nicole, but Kevin, I think maybe you'd have something to say as well. Do the prisoners speak of escaping time, escaping waiting through their art? So do they not mark time in its passage or lack of, but instead, while doing their art, while absorbed in it, do they break through the terror of time, such that momentarily it ceases to exist, so that waiting no longer is existing at that time? This escaping time, I think, similarly to meditation or athletes going into the zone and not being aware of time, maybe kind of follows up a bit on what you were just talking about.
Those are great questions. I mean, one thing I would say, and I would love to hear, Kevin must be over there thinking hard, because I feel like Kevin's art deals with a lot of these issues. Kevin, I feel like this is what your practice is dealing with.
Yeah, but not like that. Not like, I mean, I know, because I remember, because I remember just when I in 95 or 4, I went into the Mansfield Correctional Institute twice to photograph guards. And I remember the first time I was escorted by a white guard, and the guards jumped me in the weight room. So I got in a fist fight.
The guard jumped you?
Yeah, the guards jumped me. So they set me up. And then the second time I had a black escort. It was my old football coach's brother, Lanier, like Wilbur Lanier's brother. And so that time I got to talk. I got to talk to more prisoners and stuff, but they knew exactly what time was. I mean, they knew that, because I remember, because I was 95, and then so, the new millennium seemed abstract. So I would ask these young brothers, like, when they were getting out, and they would say, like, 2017, you just couldn't, now they're probably out now, but they're like 2037, like these crazy numbers.
Crazy numbers, right?
Yeah. They had new numbers and stuff. So they knew time. And then I like the piece with the soap, because the repetition of it, because that's a quick.
And there's a lot of repetition. So thanks for bringing that up. I actually write a lot about that in my book, is that it's like so much of the art making is really labor intensive and incredibly time consuming.
Yeah.
And it's based on a kind of repetitive movements or repetitive gestures.
Yeah.
And like Jesse Crime, who did the soap, he actually was a metal artist before he went to prison. And he said he got into repetition because it was one of the ways that he just felt like he had like some kind of control over like an experience of where he really had no control. It was through
the materials were at his hand, and also his materials were available to them right there. Yeah. So the whole idea of making art was anything. Yeah, it was kind of
absolutely nice. But what you said too is like Reginald Dwayne Betts is a poet. He was in prison as a teen, and he wrote about that too. He said, he'd meet these young guys his age. He was given 10-year sentence. He'd meet a guy who was 16, 17, who had been sentenced to 90 years. And he was like, how do you how do you, I mean, we actually as human beings, I don't think we can even, I don't think we have the capacity to grasp that amount of time.
Well, yeah, I mean,
in the same way that we can't see a black hole, you know what I mean? They're just like, I think there's certain things that are just like beyond our ability to really fully comprehend.
Yeah, I mean, I have, like I said, I mean, I think that I have a really, really close relative that was murdered, and I know every day when that guy's up for parole. So even on the outside, I know exactly when that cat's up for parole. So it can translate on the outside, on the inside too as well. because it's, you know, because it's all like kind of oppressive in a weird way. Yeah. So.
Well, we're all tethered to it. I mean, that's what prisons do, is like on the inside and outside, you're attached to it, right?
Yeah,
But I think that experience of time is so different because it's the embodiment of it. And like you were saying, how those guys knew exactly the time. A lot of the people I write about say that like time becomes so internalized. Like they know when they hear the walk of certain guards, it must be 6 a.m. and there's going to be the wake up call.
Yeah.
They smell like sloppy joes, it's Tuesday lunch. Like they actually like the institute, like time really becomes
well, that's elementary school.
experience.
You know that institutional.
Yeah, but it becomes,
you know, Wednesday is Salisbury
like a sensory experience.
Yeah, totally, yeah. But anyway, I mean, you know, the way I think for me, I mean, the way I formally compose time is mostly slow. Not just waiting, but slow, you know.
I like how you're slow with time.
So
and I think that's that's so Midwest, so Ohio.
you know.
Isn't it? Like, so for the audience who don't know, that Kev and I are both from Ohio. So
and, you know, like in Mansfield, I mean, you know exactly what time of everything that happens. I think when my friends finally visit me in Mansfield, they were freaked out because they knew, because I work in the factory now, so everybody has to get up at the same time. Second shift, first shift, or you just I mean, it's always there, and so it marks a lot of things, so to speak. Yeah, so that kind of, so I like that, and kind of like, and then also how, and a lot of like the thing I really wanted to do with some of the films that I haven't quite done yet, but I used to notice that my parents looked different on Monday than they did on Friday, because they had the week on them. They had the kind of, in fact, my mom always cooked, but Friday we either had Kentucky Fried Chicken, Church's, or Long John Silver, because they got home late, to go. So, what they got home late, both of them got home late on Fridays, and they were just too tired to cook and stuff like that. So that was the kind of physicality of the week on them. So that's how I kind of got into films, was the whole idea of like, how can I show that kind of physicality of not just working, but the result of working can do on the body, so to speak. So that's how some of the films have got.
Super interesting to hear that, Kevin. I know Natalie was asking privately earlier, like how your work shifted from sculpture to film, and it's interesting to hear you say that you shifted to film for it to become more physical.
Yeah, because the sculptures, because I would make these like furniture pieces, and for me it was more about what the week, to earn the money to buy the thing. So what happened during the week to earn the money to buy the thing on Saturday. So that's how I kind of got into kind of films, because I wanted to show that kind of physicality somehow or another. And then so those prison films that you saw. The one of them was like when the guard was going through the entrance building or something like that. So the whole idea of the repetition and the kind of physicality and stuff, and the psychological of being in the prison, affected, because I remember my son's mom, I mean, she never cussed until she started working in the prison. I remember like, whoa, what's going on? It's like, because she was just, because she brought it home, right? She brought the language home. And then it's funny because I cuss like a sailor, but the only time I didn't cuss is when I taught high school. So, because I'd bring it, so I wouldn't swear all day. So I'd bring it home and not swear, but yeah. So I
wanted to try and maybe connect two questions. There's a ton of questions actually from the audience, but one question had to do with the relationship between accumulation and waiting. And I know, Nicole, both of you spoke about this way in which there's this repetition that is present in a lot of the work. And the other question that I want to connect to it is a question by Louise Val, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Does a purpose in their waiting emerge through their art? And I guess the way I'm thinking of these two questions is that on the one hand, there's this kind of repetition of the smell of prison food or the movement of the guards, this kind of like oppressive kind of repetition. And then there's this other kind of accumulation and repetition, that of making these portraits or making this art. And I'm curious to hear how you think of those two ways of using time to maybe, as Louise says, find purpose in that process of waiting.
I like that question. I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there is something around accumulation that definitely takes place in prison, largely because of the material constraints. So in prison, people have very limited access to, to art supplies, just to all kinds of things that we take for granted outside of prison. And so when you can accumulate, I think it is the sense of kind of a type of power that people experience in a place where they're otherwise disempowered. And I do think it's a way of marking or that experience of that kind of temporality. And I say marking instead of waiting, because I think waiting, I don't know, waiting for me feels like there's an intentionality to it. And I think a lot of people are hopeful and they're trying to do things to kind of manipulate or make sense of that sentence. Like the artist that I showed you who did that painting called Elapsion with the brick slave ship, he used to do ceramics and all that, but he became an abstract painter, like literally as a practice, a Buddhist practice. He's not a Buddhist, but it was as a practice of abstracting time. Because he said to like spend every day thinking about how much time he had in prison was going to make him go crazy. So he started to just to abstract as much of his experience to just become as removed from markers, calendars, and clocks, and that kind of, and just to be like right in the zone of what he was doing at any given moment. Because he said he couldn't grasp like the 18 years he was sentenced to, or the fact that all that time was away from his young children and and everything he was missing on the outside.
Thank you. That was, I mean, what you say, marking versus waiting, is so interesting. That being in the present, and I think with Kevin's films too, it really feels like what you're asking for is for us to be with time, or to be with people, right, for a period of time. It's not about plot, it's not about narrative arc, it's about being present physically. And
yeah. I like that, being with time. That's nice.
Yeah, it's all about dirty time. It's about, and that's why some of those like films are 8 hours and stuff, and then the whole idea of not cutting, not editing, because it's not editorialized, so you become invested, I think, once, because you don't have any kind of edits. I think you become invested in either the people or the gesture or the task or something like that. So that's a kind of formal strategy, is like that duration, so to speak. Yeah.
Maybe we'll take one last question from the audience and then wrap up, if that's okay with you. There's a question from Barbarita Polster, who says,
oh, yeah.
I'm thinking of the potential relationship between the index and waiting. Professor Fleetwood, you mentioned portraiture as a resistant alternative to prison indexing, example, mugshots, etc. And I'm thinking in Kevin's film of the ability to know these flying objects via their index or trace. Any thoughts on whether indexicality itself inherently relates to instances of / tendency towards waiting or potential? It's a long question, but.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the way I like indexicality, it'd be like, you put 4 Eversons in a room together, a poker game would break out. So if somebody says they saw a flying saucer, it was like, yeah, cool, and you keep dealing. I mean, it's not like you're gonna, why lie about that, right? So that's why I call it identified flying object, because we know what we saw. It's not like, so what was that? No, it was a flying, I could tell my uncle, like, it's a flying saucer. it did this and that, and then, you know, like, deal. You know, it was just like, you know, there's no, you know, it's like, there's no debating, right? You know, just kind of bring it up. So that's the kind of indexicality. And I think somebody asked a question about how those people knew that, I think because that helicopter had a massive loss of fuel because they were ascending, I think, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and I've written about indexicality and Black photography in the past, and like,
Yeah.
and this actually goes back to that question around accumulation too, you know, and as a way of also kind of resisting like iconic representations of Black, and by iconic I mean even iconic like prison images, right, and the kind of linking between race and carcerality. But you know, with this project, you know, something that came up, was it Barbara who asked that question? I just with this project, what I started using instead of indexicality was like seriality. So a lot of like those soap portraits, and then like the book cover. So there's it. And then if you know the well-known African-American portrait artist, Titus Kaphar, they're all working on like prison and what I call carceral indexes, but it's a kind of seriality. So it's not about individuated portraits, nor is it about making people anonymous or rendering them just like cogs in a system, you know, but it is about kind of serializing these experiences around a kind of tethering to notions of criminality and imprisonment. And so that's I think that term is related to indexicality, but maybe it does something a little different.
But also too, I remember when we were in Puerto Rico, you showed a picture. I love that image of all the women on that stairwell.
That's what you love.
So I like the pictures going into the prison,
right?
Because you said that they were all like posing and looking their best, vying for attention.
Right, and well, I think that also you like that because that image looks like something in one of your films, because your films look like the Black people in Ohio, and this is like all my aunts.
No,
like,
I liked it the way you described it too. Though you had it like they was all like, and then so I like because those portraits was like everybody's trying to be like, people don't want their mugshots to be what people remember them by.
Exactly.
You know, so they want to look good. And I remember because I remember when we were, I shot this film called Quality Control. Shot it in
I love that film.
Yeah, in a dry cleaning in Pritchard, Alabama. And we were only there for like one day, but it seems like we're there for like 9 days because they were all going in there fixing their hair. You know, like they're going to be on there. So I was like, this looks like a different day. I was like, that's the same woman. I was getting all confused of who was who, because they wanted to look their best. You know, people want to look their best. You know, they want to look their best.
Well, I think this is also like, this has been the work of Black people centuries long, is to not be defined by white racist stereotypes, and not as it just like, not because we care about what white people think about us, but we care about what we think about us.
So that's why they're getting
exactly a deep concern about self-presentation, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because you will be called out if you show up otherwise. And even visiting like my cousin Alan in prison, he was impeccable. Like his state issued clothes were, you know, they would be like starched and pressed and like showing up at like in his finest, right? And it's like looking his finest even in those conditions.
And also the people visiting him were impeccable too as well. Yeah. So, but I still love that picture. No, because they were all competing for his attention. So it was fantastic because it was like this amazing freeze, and then so your eye would pop back and forth to all these different women.
I'll have to send you that image.
Yeah. Well, in the book, ain't it? Yeah, the picture's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's in the book.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
I feel like it's so unfair to end the conversation with the description of an image that none of us can see.
It's in the book. Tell them to buy the book, Nicole.
Yes, that's right. So everyone go see Marking Time at PS1. Go buy the book.
Damn right. Yeah.
Go see Kevin's show at Andrew Krebs in January.
Oh, well, hold on. I don't know when now. Hold on.
Oh, he doesn't know when it happens.
Somebody just called you out and said that at the Carnegie International, your work was the best in the show. The experience of time expressed in assembly line factory labor seems related here.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks.
So lots and lots of praise of like Kevin's incredible work. So thank Rick and Avi, Amara, Emily, Nick, John, Bobby,
Emily hooked
Mark.
it up. Yeah, there's a lot of muscle there,
Everyone.
Nick. Yeah, there's a lot of muscle.
So thank you both for your warmth and generosity and for sharing so much with us. I want to invite the audience back on October 22nd. We have Sandrine Kanak and Felipe Steinberg for the next Shifter session on waiting. So we hope to see you then. Thank you again, Kevin and Nicole. I'm gonna clap. Maybe others can clap, but it feels bad to end without clapping.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Well, I bow to you all. Good to see you all.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, bye.
Stay safe. Yeah. Wow, man. Right on. Oh, man. I gotta get out of here. All right.
Okay. Everybody still here?
Yeah.
I just started removing attendees manually. I assume those
can do
people.
that?
Yeah, it's one by one, so.
Oh, okay.
Just
get out of here.
Just takes a really long time.
Oh.
So.
I didn't realize I would have helped you. So it's just in the participant thing that you can do it that way, where you promote them.